He walked into his mother-in-law's birthday party carrying only an old duffel and his pride. They laughed when they heard his inheritance was a ruined house, mocking him in front of everyone. When he took his daughter's hand to leave, they blocked him, and someone shoved him down. The room froze as his K9 rushed in, standing guard without a sound. His daughter ran to him, helped him up, eyes steady and unafraid. She chose her father, choosing love over comfort, loyalty over wealth. What would you choose? Tell us where you're watching from, and like, share, and subscribe to K9 and Seal Stories. The Cross Estate sat on the highest rise overlooking the bay, a place where manicured hedges never grew uneven, and the grass was trimmed so precisely it looked more like velvet than soil. Strings of warm lights were suspended between white pillars, casting a golden glow over linen-draped tables and crystal glasses already half-filled with champagne. Laughter drifted easily through the open garden, the kind of laughter that came from people who had never worried about being seen, only about being admired. Tonight was framed as a celebration for Madeline Cross's mother, part birthday, part social gathering, but in truth it was an exhibition of influence. Town council members, business owners, real estate developers, and old families whose names were carved into plaques and buildings mingled effortlessly, each face carrying the quiet confidence of belonging. That confidence wavered when the iron gate at the edge of the lawn creaked open. Jack Mercer stepped inside without ceremony. He carried a weathered military duffel slung over one shoulder, its fabric faded from years of use, its seams reinforced by habit rather than style. He was in his early 30s, tall, broad-shouldered, and disciplined in the way men were when they had learned to hold themselves together under pressure. His angular face bore the kind of rugged sharpness that came from long nights without sleep and decisions that had once carried consequences measured in lives rather than comfort. Clean-shaven, with cold blue-gray eyes that rarely revealed more than they needed to, Jack moved with a calm, deliberate stillness. His hair was cut in a modern, neat undercut, tight faded sides and a short textured top, functional and precise, the style of someone who valued order even when life refused to provide it. At his side walked Ava Mercer, 7 years old, small-framed and quietly observant, wearing a simple long-sleeve dress in a muted, neutral tone. Her dark hair was neatly brushed, her hands clasped tightly around her father's fingers, as though letting go might cause her to disappear. There was a gentleness to her face, but also a sensitivity that suggested she noticed more than adults assumed. She had learned early how to read silence. Just behind them moved Ranger. The Belgian Malinois was full-grown, 4 to 5 years old, lean and muscular with a deep fawn-to-mahogany coat and a distinct black facial mask that sharpened the intensity of his dark amber eyes. His ears stood upright, constantly adjusting to the environment, and his posture was alert but controlled. Ranger wore a tan tactical K9 vest and a simple working dog collar, nothing decorative, nothing unnecessary. He did not pull at the leash or scan the crowd wildly. Instead, he matched Jack's pace, his body aligned with the man's direction, his presence steady and deliberate, like a silent extension of Jack's awareness. Conversations faltered. Glasses paused halfway to lips. Heads turned. No one stepped forward to greet them. Jack felt the shift immediately, the subtle tightening in the air that came when a room decided, without words, that someone did not belong. He had felt it before, in different places, under different circumstances, but this version carried a sharper edge. This was not a battlefield. This was a garden. And yet the tension was unmistakable. Madeline Cross turned from a cluster of guests near the center of the lawn. She was in her early 30s, poised and meticulously composed, wearing an elegant, neutral-toned dress that complemented her pale skin and carefully styled hair. Every detail of her appearance spoke of control. Her expression flickered for only a second when she saw Jack, just long enough for something tight and unreadable to surface, before her lips curved into a practiced, restrained smile. She was beautiful in the way that made people listen when she spoke, and distant in the way that made them hesitate before challenging her. "You're early," she said calmly, as though this were a casual inconvenience rather than a moment years in the making. Jack did not respond immediately. Instead, he reached into his duffel and withdrew a folded document, smoothing it once before holding it out to her. "According to the court order," he said, his voice low and even, "today is the day Ava comes to live with me. 3 months. Trial period." Madeline accepted the paper with 2 fingers, glancing at it as though it were a menu she had already memorized. "Yes," she said. "I remember." She tilted her head slightly toward Ava. "Sweetheart, do you want to go?" Ava looked up at her mother, then back at her father. Her grip tightened. She nodded once, silently. A soft scoff rippled from somewhere behind Madeline. A woman, one of Madeline's cousins, impeccably dressed and already flushed with wine, leaned toward another guest and murmured loudly enough to be heard, "Well, look at that." The soldier finally came back for his kid. Another voice followed, male, older, carrying the ease of someone used to being listened to. "Didn't he inherit that old wreck on the cliffs? Seacliff House, wasn't it? I hear even the rats left years ago." Laughter spread, light and unchallenged. Jack said nothing. He lowered himself in front of Ava, adjusting the collar of her dress with careful hands, his movements precise, almost ritualistic. His face betrayed no anger, no embarrassment, only focus. Ava swallowed hard, her eyes shimmering, but she did not cry. Madeline crossed her arms. The smile had faded from her lips. "I'm not stopping you," she said coolly. "It's your legal right. But if you're truly planning to take her to a place without basic necessities, I'll have no choice but to request a reassessment. A child needs stability. Jack, not endurance training. My daughter needs someone who shows up," Jack replied quietly. "Not luxury." A brief silence followed, heavier than the laughter that had preceded it. Then Madeline delivered the line with surgical precision. "If my daughter has to live in that house, then it's just one misfortune after another." Jack looked at her for a long moment. There was no fire in his eyes, no plea. Only something steady and resolved, shaped by years of learning when to speak and when silence carried more weight. He turned back to Ava, took her small hand in his, and stood. "Let's go home." As they walked away, Ranger shifted his position slightly, stepping closer to Jack's leg when one of the men at the edge of the crowd took a step forward, perhaps emboldened by drink or by numbers. The dog did not growl. He did not bare his teeth. He simply stood there, solid and unmoving, a quiet boundary no one chose to cross. They passed through the garden without looking back. Ava kept her eyes fixed ahead, her fingers laced tightly with her father's. The laughter resumed behind them, but it sounded thinner now, less certain. Near the far end of the lawn, partially obscured by a column, a man Jack did not recognize raised his phone. He filmed silently as the soldier, the child, and the dog disappeared through the iron gate, capturing the stillness of Jack's posture, the way Ava clung to him, the calm, unwavering presence of Ranger at their side. No one noticed, and no one yet understood that the brief, quiet humiliation unfolding beneath those glowing lights was about to ignite something far larger than a party ever intended to contain. The pickup truck climbed the dirt road in low gear, its engine humming steadily as loose gravel crackled beneath the tires. The path wound upward along the rocky coastline, narrow and uneven, with scrub grass and wild thorns pressing in from both sides. The sea was somewhere below, unseen but unmistakable, its presence carried on the wind that smelled of salt and wet stone. Jack Mercer kept both hands on the wheel, his posture upright and controlled, eyes fixed ahead as if the road were another mission route he had memorized long ago. Beside him, Ava sat quietly, knees drawn up on the seat, her forehead resting lightly against the window as she tried to make sense of the unfamiliar terrain. After several minutes, she spoke in a voice barely louder than the wind slipping through the cracked window sill. Is this our house, Dad?" Jack did not answer right away. He slowed the truck as the path leveled out, the engine idling while a rusted iron gate came into view, half hidden behind overgrown ivy. Beyond it, Seacliff House rose against the gray sky like a forgotten relic. 3 stories tall, its stone facade was stained dark by years of salt spray and rain. Vines crept along the walls, their roots digging deep into cracks that had been left unattended for decades. One side of the upper balcony had collapsed entirely, leaving jagged beams exposed like broken ribs. The air around the place felt heavier, carrying the mixed scent of damp earth, rotting wood, and the ocean's restless breath. Jack finally nodded. "Yeah," he said quietly. "This is it." The gate resisted him at first. The key was old, its metal worn smooth, and it took 3 full turns before the lock gave way with a long, groaning creak. Ranger was already alert, stepping out of the truck the moment Jack opened the door. The Belgian Malinois moved with deliberate caution, nose low, ears pricked forward. He did not pull or rush ahead. Instead, he paced the perimeter of the gate, sniffing the ground and the rusted hinges, as if cataloging every scent the place had absorbed over the years. Inside the grounds, weeds grew unchecked, brushing against Ava's legs as she followed her father. Jack noticed how she hesitated, how her fingers tightened around the strap of her small backpack. He slowed his pace instinctively, keeping Ranger between them and the deeper shadows near the house. The dog's presence was steady, grounding, his movements precise and economical, every step purposeful. The front door sagged on its hinges when Jack pushed it open with his shoulder. The smell inside was sharper, dust, mildew, old wood soaked with moisture. Floorboards creaked beneath their weight, some dipping slightly as though hollowed from below. The walls were blotched with dark stains, paint peeling in long strips that curled like dead leaves. A toppled armchair lay on its side near the entrance, its stuffing exposed, while a collapsed bookshelf rested in the center of what must have once been a living room. Ava's eyes widened, but she said nothing. She moved slowly, carefully, as if afraid the house itself might react to her presence. One room, however, stood apart. At the far end of the ground floor, past a narrow hallway, Jack pushed open a heavy wooden door and stepped into what had once been a library. Dust coated the shelves, but they were intact, lined with old books arranged with deliberate care. The air here felt different, less stale, less invaded by decay. A single tall window let in muted daylight, illuminating a faded painting on the wall. It depicted a lone figure standing near the edge of darkness, not advancing, not retreating, but watching. Ranger paused at the threshold, then entered slowly. His nose traced the edges of the room, but he did not wander. He stopped at specific points along the floor, sniffing deeply, then moving on, as if marking locations only he could understand. Jack noticed it immediately. The dog's behavior was too precise to be random. Upstairs, Jack found what he hadn't known he was looking for. On a small side table near the stairwell lay a worn leather notebook, its cover cracked and softened by age. The moment he opened it, recognition struck. The handwriting was angular and disciplined, familiar in a way that tightened his chest. Edmund Mercer. His uncle had been a quiet man, distant but observant, someone who had always seemed to be watching the world from just outside its frame. The first page held a single line. Only when looking backward can we see what was left behind. Jack closed the notebook slowly, his thumb resting on the edge of the page. He remembered Edmund's eyes, sharp, thoughtful, always measuring. Edmund had never been sentimental, never one for grand gestures. Whatever this was, it had been left intentionally. They ate dinner that night sitting on the floor of the library, the cleanest space they could manage. A single lamp cast a weak circle of light as the wind outside rose, rattling the windows and sending low, mournful sounds through the walls. Ava picked at her food, then looked up at Jack with a small, tentative smile. "It's not like Mom's house," she said, choosing her words carefully. "But I think it's okay." Jack felt something tighten in his chest. "We'll make it better," he said. He did not promise comfort. He promised effort. That night, as Ava slept on a makeshift bed of blankets, Ranger remained awake. Jack noticed it when he stepped back into the living room, the flashlight beam catching the dog sitting rigidly near the old stone fireplace. Ranger's ears were upright, his gaze fixed on a specific section of the wall. He did not bark. He did not move. He simply watched, muscles taut, as if listening to something beneath the stone. Jack whispered the dog's name, expecting him to turn. But Ranger did not break eye contact with the fireplace. Instead, he lowered his head slightly and pressed one paw against the floor, right where the stone met the wood, then looked back at Jack once, just once, with an intensity that made Jack's breath catch. It was the same look Ranger had worn overseas, the look that meant pay attention. Jack knelt, placing his hand against the cold stone. For a brief moment, he thought he felt something, an echo, a hollow beneath the surface. But when he pulled his hand away, there was only silence and the distant roar of the sea. Later, unable to sleep, Jack returned to Edmund's notebook. As he flipped through the final pages, a small, folded piece of paper slipped free and landed on the floor. It was triangular, yellowed with age, its edges worn. Jack unfolded it carefully. Inside was a hand-drawn fragment of a map, rough but deliberate, marked with a strange symbol near the base of what looked like a structure. No explanation, no legend, just the mark. Jack sat back against the wall, the paper resting in his palm. He glanced toward Ranger, who had finally relaxed, lying down but still facing the fireplace, eyes half open. The house creaked around them, settling into the night. Whatever Edmund had left behind, it wasn't meant to be obvious. And somehow, Ranger already knew where to look. Morning arrived quietly at Seacliff House, the kind of pale coastal morning where the sky looked undecided about whether it wanted to clear or collapse into rain. Jack Mercer rose before Ava woke, moving through the cold rooms with the same disciplined silence that had once kept him alive overseas. Ranger followed close behind, the Belgian Malinois padding softly across the uneven floorboards, his lean frame alert even in rest. The strange behavior from the night before lingered in Jack's mind. The way Ranger had fixed his gaze on the old fireplace, the deliberate pressure of a single paw against the floor. It had not felt like coincidence. It had felt like a signal. Jack left Ava sleeping and drove into town. The Havenport Town Library stood behind a line of old cypress trees, its stone exterior weathered smooth by decades of salt air. The building resembled a small chapel more than a modern civic space. Arched windows, a heavy wooden door, and a narrow bell tower that no longer rang. Inside, the smell of old paper and polished wood hung thick and familiar. Jack paused just inside the doorway, his shoulders instinctively squaring as his eyes adjusted to the dimness. Ranger remained in the truck. Jack had learned long ago when to rely on the dog's presence and when to leave him guarding unseen. "You're here because of Edmund Mercer." The voice came from between the stacks. Jack turned sharply. The woman who stepped into view was in her late 60s, tall but slightly stooped, her thin frame wrapped in a wool cardigan the color of dried leaves. Her silver hair was pulled back into a neat bun at the nape of her neck, and wire-rimmed glasses rested low on her nose. Her face was lined, not with bitterness but with years of careful observation, the kind earned by listening more than speaking. Her eyes were sharp, gray-blue, and unnervingly familiar. "Margaret Weller," she said calmly, setting a broom aside. "I used to work here long before they tried to modernize the place. And before you ask, yes, I knew Edmund." Jack studied her. "How did you know why I was here?" Margaret's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. "Because no one walks into this library before 9 in the morning unless they're searching for something they can't find anywhere else. And because you have Edmund's eyes. Same way of looking at a room like it might lie to you." She gestured for him to follow. As they walked deeper into the library, she spoke without turning. "Edmund came here often in his later years, always alone. Always sat at the same table. He never borrowed books. He just checked facts, old land records, architectural plans, local histories no one else bothered with." They stopped at a narrow desk near the archive room. Margaret opened a drawer and removed a sealed envelope, its edges yellowed, the wax stamp cracked but intact. Jack felt his chest tighten before she even handed it to him. "He left this with me 15 years ago," she said. "Told me to give it only if someone from his family came looking. Not asking for money, not asking for property. Looking." Jack took the envelope. His name was written across the front in Edmund's unmistakable hand. Margaret's voice lowered. "He used to say that house wasn't meant for living. It was meant to test people. To see who could stay when there was nothing to gain." Jack broke the seal carefully and unfolded the letter. The handwriting was deliberate, the words sparse. "Do not trust every wall. Do not overlook the smallest thing. 3 marks exist: pantry, library, master bedroom. Each hides a layer. Whoever finds all 3 is the one I trust." Jack read it twice, then looked up. Margaret was watching him closely. "He was afraid," she added quietly. "Not for himself, for the future. He once told me a child might one day be used as leverage, that people would circle the house not because of what it was, but because of what it hid." Jack folded the letter and slipped it into his jacket. A child. Ava. He thanked Margaret and left without another word. Halfway down the coastal road back to Seacliff House, Jack noticed Ranger's reflection in the rearview mirror. The dog was sitting upright in the truck bed, muscles rigid, eyes locked not on the road ahead, but on the road behind them. Jack glanced into the mirror and caught sight of a dark sedan cresting the hill at a distance, maintaining just enough space to avoid suspicion. Ranger did not bark. He did not shift. His gaze never wavered. Jack slowed slightly, then turned onto an unmarked side road. The sedan followed, for exactly 3 turns, before abruptly disappearing. Ranger relaxed only after it was gone. When Jack reached Seacliff House, the unease returned full force. The front door stood closed, but the lock bore fresh scratches, subtle, careless. Someone had tested it. Jack stepped inside, scanning the rooms with trained efficiency. Nothing was missing. Nothing was disturbed, except the pantry door, which hung a fraction lower than it had that morning. Ranger growled softly for the first time since they'd arrived, placing himself between Jack and the hallway. Not aggressive, protective. Jack closed his eyes briefly, inhaling the damp, salty air of the house. Edmund hadn't built a puzzle for fun. He had built a warning, and someone else had already started trying to solve it. The afternoon light slanted through the tall window of the library, dust motes drifting lazily in its pale beam as if time itself had slowed inside that room. Ava sat cross-legged on the worn wooden floor with a box of old crayons she had found in a drawer, her brow slightly furrowed in concentration. She was drawing the house, not as it looked from the outside, but as it felt from within. Ranger lay beside her, his lean body stretched along the edge of the rug, ears relaxed yet responsive, eyes half closed but never truly resting. Jack stood a few steps away, studying the shelves Edmund had kept intact, his thoughts looping through the letter's warnings like a mantra. Do not trust every wall. Do not overlook the smallest thing. Ava shifted suddenly, pressing her palm into the rug. Dad, she said softly. This part feels funny. Jack looked down. Funny how? She pressed again, then lifted the corner slightly. Like it's puffed up, like there's air under it. Ranger's ears snapped upright. Without rising fully, the Belgian Malinois leaned forward and placed one paw exactly where Ava had touched. He scratched once, lightly, deliberately, then stopped and looked at Jack, his dark amber eyes steady and unblinking. He did not bark. He did not scratch again. The message was clear enough without noise. Jack knelt, heart pounding in a rhythm he recognized from years of breaching doors under fire. He lifted the rug. Beneath it, faded but unmistakable, was a red X, painted directly onto the wooden floor, worn down by time but still vivid enough to feel intentional. Jack exhaled slowly, as though releasing a breath he'd been holding since the night Ranger first stared at the fireplace. This was the second mark. Library. He fetched a small pry bar from his duffel and worked carefully at the floorboards. The wood resisted at first, then gave with a dry crack. Beneath the planks lay a cast-iron hatch, its surface cold and dark, fitted flush into the foundation. There was no lock, no chain, no sign that anyone had tried to force it open. Jack paused, glancing at Ava. She had moved closer, her small hand wrapped around Ranger's vest strap, eyes wide but not afraid. "We don't have to," Jack said quietly. Ava shook her head. "Uncle Edmund wanted you to find it." The stairs beneath the hatch descended into darkness. Jack clicked on his flashlight and stepped down first, one hand gripping the rail. The other extended back toward Ava. The air below was cool and dry, unexpectedly clean. Ranger followed last, his movements silent, his body angled protectively behind the child. The basement opened into a wide room. Every surface was covered in white cloths. Tables, shelves, carved wooden crates. Each one dust-free, as if sealed away from time. The light revealed a space that felt preserved rather than abandoned. At the center stood a large wooden trunk, reinforced with iron bands, secured by 3 padlocks. Jack recognized them instantly, not as security devices, but as symbols. The kind meant to deter impatience rather than thieves. He tried the first lock. It opened with a soft click. The second followed just as easily. The third resisted for a heartbeat, then released, as if acknowledging something invisible had been satisfied. Jack lifted the lid. Inside lay neatly arranged gold bars, silver ingots, old bonds tied with faded ribbon, and thick bank ledgers bearing dates decades old. The sheer weight of it pressed down on Jack's chest, not as greed, but as gravity. At the bottom of the trunk lay a framed photograph. A younger Jack, no older than 8, standing awkwardly beside Edmund Mercer, his uncle's hand resting on his shoulder. Beneath the frame, in Edmund's precise handwriting, were the words, "If one day you return, let trust guide you to the right door." Ava reached out, touching the edge of the frame with reverent care. "He knew you'd come back," she whispered. Jack swallowed hard. He found the letter folded beneath the ledgers, the paper thick and deliberate. He read it once, then again. "I did not leave wealth behind," Edmund had written. "I left a beginning. Use it cleanly. Do not let bitterness decide your future." Jack folded the letter slowly. Ranger moved closer, sniffing the trunk's interior, then stopped abruptly at one corner. His nose lingered there longer than the rest. He pawed once, soft, precise, and stepped back, head tilted. Jack reached in and found a second envelope, smaller, its paper carrying a faint, unfamiliar scent. Inside was a brief note written with less care, as if in haste. "If you are reading this, remember, this is not for revenge. The house protects only those who refuse to become what they escaped." Jack closed his eyes. They ascended back into the house in silence, the weight of discovery settling around them like a held breath. Jack replaced the hatch and the rug, restoring the illusion Edmund had crafted so carefully. Ava hugged Ranger, pressing her face briefly into his fur. The dog remained still, accepting the contact with quiet dignity. Upstairs, the wind shifted. The old landline phone in the living room rang once, and then stopped. Jack froze, every muscle tightening as the echo faded into the walls. Ranger's head snapped toward the sound, his body angling instinctively between Jack and Ava. The house fell silent again. Whatever Edmund had hidden was no longer hidden, and someone somewhere had just realized it. Morning arrived with a brittle clarity that made Seacliff House look almost honest. The fog had lifted from the cliffs, revealing the restless gray blue of the sea below, and the wind carried the sharp scent of salt through broken hedges and damp grass. Jack Mercer stood on the front step with a mug of coffee he had barely touched, Ranger at his side. The Belgian Malinois' posture relaxed but watchful, as if the dog sensed the calm was temporary. Inside, Ava sat at the small table in the library, coloring quietly, the scratch of crayon against paper the only sound in the house that felt normal. The crunch of tires on gravel broke that calm. A sleek black sedan stopped just beyond the gate, its polished surface jarringly out of place against the rust and weeds. Madeline Cross stepped out first. She wore a fitted beige coat and low heels unsuited for the uneven ground, her posture upright, her movements measured. Her hair was perfectly arranged, chestnut brown and glossy, framing a face that held no obvious tension, only control. Behind her emerged a man in a charcoal suit, tall and narrow-shouldered, his dark hair combed back neatly, wire-framed glasses perched on a sharp nose. His jawline was precise, clean-shaven, his expression practiced neutrality. This was Andrew Cole, Madeline's attorney, a man whose reputation rested on speaking softly while dismantling people with paperwork. Jack felt the shift immediately, the way he always had when a situation moved from uncertain to adversarial. Madeline smiled as she approached, the same smile she used at charity galas and town meetings. "I was in the area," she said lightly. "I thought Ava might want to see her mother." Jack did not step aside. "You should have called." Madeline's eyes flicked past him toward the house. "I didn't want to disturb you." Inside, Ava had already risen from her chair. She came to the doorway but stopped short of crossing the threshold. Her eyes went to her mother, then back to Jack. She did not run. She did not smile. She waited. Jack nodded once. Only then did Ava step forward, staying close enough that Ranger's flank brushed her leg. The dog shifted subtly, positioning himself between the child and Madeline, not aggressively, but with unmistakable intent. Ranger's dark amber eyes never left Madeline's face. Madeline noticed. Her smile tightened just enough to be seen. Andrew Cole cleared his throat. "Mr. Mercer," he said politely, his voice smooth and precise. "We're here out of concern. This property," he gestured vaguely toward the house, "is clearly in a state of disrepair. There are questions about whether it's suitable for a child." Madeline stepped closer, her gaze drifting, seemingly casual, but too deliberate to be coincidence. Her eyes paused, just for a fraction of a second, on the exact spot where Jack had replaced the rug the night before. Her head tilted. "Old houses like this," she said, "they usually have basements, don't they?" The question landed heavier than it should have. Jack felt his pulse steady, the way it always did before he spoke in moments that mattered. "It's an old house," he said. "It's being handled." Madeline's eyes dropped then, to the ground near the porch, to the patch of earth where the mud was darker, freshly disturbed despite Jack's careful work. Her heel pressed into it accidentally, or not, and she glanced down. Something flickered across her face. Recognition, interest, hunger. Ranger's ears snapped upright. He stepped forward, placing his body squarely between Ava and Madeline, his stance low and immovable. He did not growl. He did not bare his teeth. He simply stood there, a living boundary. Madeline froze, her eyes locking with the dog's. For a brief, electric second, the world narrowed to that silent confrontation. Then Madeline straightened, her composure snapping back into place like a mask pulled tight. Andrew Cole took the cue. "If necessary," he said, "we'll request a formal assessment, temporary guardianship, until safety concerns are addressed." Jack looked down at Ava. She had reached for his hand without thinking, her fingers curling tightly around his. She did not look at her mother. "You didn't come here for her," Jack said quietly, his gaze returning to Madeline. "You came because you think there's something in this house." Madeline laughed softly, as though amused. "You're imagining things." But her eyes betrayed her. The certainty was gone. She turned, heels sinking slightly into the damp soil as she walked back toward the sedan. Andrew followed, already checking something on his phone. The car door closed with a muted thud, and the sedan rolled away down the narrow road, leaving behind only the sound of gravel settling and the faint smell of exhaust. Jack stood still long after they were gone. Inside the house, the landline phone rang again, just once, then fell silent. By midday, the town was buzzing. Jack learned about the video when his phone vibrated for the third time in 10 minutes. Messages, notifications, a missed call from an unknown number. When he finally opened one of the links sent by a former teammate, his stomach tightened. The footage was grainy but unmistakable. Jack standing at the edge of the Cross Estate lawn, duffel on his shoulder, Ava clinging to his hand, Ranger at his side. Laughter, snickers. Madeline's voice, cold, precise, delivering the line that had cut deepest. If my daughter has to live in that house, it's just one misfortune after another. The caption beneath the video read, "Soldier humiliated at elite party. His response silences the room." The clip spread faster than Jack could process. Comments multiplied. Some mocked, some defended, some asked questions that hadn't been asked before. Ava watched him from the doorway as he lowered the phone. "Are we in trouble?" she asked. Jack knelt in front of her, cupping her face gently. "No," he said, and meant it. "But things are changing." Ranger pressed closer, his head resting briefly against Jack's knee before lifting again, eyes scanning the windows, the door, the quiet road beyond the gate. The dog understood change better than most humans ever would. That evening, as the sun dipped low and cast long shadows across the cliffs, Jack sat alone at the table, the letters from Edmund spread before him. He understood now. Ava wasn't just his daughter. She was leverage. The house wasn't just shelter. It was a test and a target. And the town had just been invited to watch. The leak did not come with an announcement. It arrived quietly, the way rot always does, spreading before anyone could agree on where it began. By dawn, screenshots were circulating. Blurry photographs of the iron-bound trunk, a partial image of the hand-drawn map, the red X circled in harsh digital contrast. No names attached, no source claimed, just enough detail to ignite speculation. By noon, Havenport was split cleanly down the middle. Some spoke of destiny, of a soldier wronged finally finding justice. Others whispered greed, instability, danger. The comments were harsher than the faces ever had been at the Cross Estate, because anonymity sharpened cruelty. Jack Mercer watched none of it directly. He felt it instead, in the way the cashier at the hardware store avoided his eyes, in the sudden interest of strangers slowing their cars near Seacliff House, in the quiet change of tone when his name was spoken. Ava sensed it too. She stayed closer to him, her hand brushing his sleeve whenever the phone buzzed, her drawings turning darker, more enclosed. The legal response came 3 days later. Madeline Cross filed for temporary custody and a formal review of all assets discovered after the divorce, citing post-marital property entanglement and the psychological impact of sudden wealth on a minor. The phrasing was precise, polished, designed to sound like concern while cutting like a blade. Andrew Cole's name appeared on every page. The courthouse was packed the morning of the hearing. Cameras crowded the steps, their lenses tracking Jack as he walked past without a word, his posture straight, his face composed. He wore a plain suit, old, slightly worn at the cuffs, but clean. Ranger was not allowed inside. The Malinois sat obediently beside the deputy at the entrance, eyes locked on Jack until the doors closed. Inside, Madeline sat with her legal team, flawless in black, her hair smooth, her expression unreadable. Her father occupied the second row behind her, silver-haired, broad-faced, wearing the quiet authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. He did not look at Jack. The arguments came fast. Jack was unemployed. Jack lived in a structurally unsound property. Jack had a documented history of combat exposure that could compromise emotional stability. The photos of the house were projected large, peeling walls, cracked beams, shadows framed to look threatening. The treasure images followed, stripped of context, framed as temptation rather than inheritance. Jack's attorney spoke in measured tones, but the room had already leaned one way. Public pressure was thick in the air, pressing down on every word. Then Dr. Helen Brooks was called. She was in her early 50s, tall, with graying auburn hair pulled into a low knot, her face calm but deeply lined around the eyes. She wore no jewelry beyond a watch, her posture upright, her presence steady. A child psychologist contracted by the court, Dr. Brooks had spent 2 decades evaluating children caught between parents, power, and public attention. She did not look at Madeline when she spoke. She looked at the judge. "There is no immediate evidence of neglect," she said clearly. However, the level of media exposure and adult conflict surrounding this child has escalated rapidly. For her well-being, I recommend a temporary 14-day placement under neutral supervision, allowing for independent psychological assessment. The room went still. Jack felt it before the gavel fell, the way you feel impact before pain registers. The judge nodded slowly, hands folded. Motion granted. Ava was taken that afternoon. There were no handcuffs, no shouting, just quiet efficiency. Ava's small backpack sat on the bench beside her as the social worker knelt to her level, speaking softly. Ava did not cry. She looked at Jack instead, searching his face as if committing it to memory. Jack knelt too, pressing his forehead to hers, whispering words meant only for her. He did not promise outcomes. He promised presence. Ranger strained against the leash outside when Ava passed, a low sound vibrating in his chest, not a bark, but something deeper. He sat when commanded, though every muscle in his body resisted. Ava reached through the gap between the doors to touch his fur once. Then she was gone. Seacliff House was unbearable without her. The silence pressed in from every corner. Jack moved through the rooms like a ghost, the echoes of Ava's footsteps louder in their absence than her laughter ever had been. That night, Ranger lay down in front of Ava's bedroom door and refused to move. He did not whine. He did not sleep. He stayed there, head resting on his paws, eyes fixed on the darkened room as if guarding something that might still return. Jack sat at the table. Edmund's letters spread before him, the weight of them heavier now. He understood the test fully at last. This wasn't about wealth. It was about endurance, about whether he would break when the loss came dressed as legality. Near midnight, a knock sounded at the door. Not loud, not urgent, 3 soft taps. Jack froze. Ranger lifted his head instantly, ears sharp, body tense but silent. Jack opened the door to find no one there, only a thick envelope resting on the step, unmarked. Inside was a single sheet of paper. 6 words, typed, cold and deliberate. "They don't just want the girl." Jack closed his eyes, the message settling into his bones. He did not sleep that night. By morning, the house felt different. Not empty, but braced. Ranger finally rose from Ava's doorway and followed Jack outside, scanning the cliffs, the road, the tree line. The dog's instincts were not fear-driven. They were anticipatory. Someone had crossed from watching to acting. And the law had given them cover. Jack did not sleep the night after the letter arrived. He sat at the kitchen table with the ocean wind pushing against the windows, the old glass humming softly as if the house itself were breathing. Ranger lay at his feet, body angled toward the door, ears twitching at every sound that did not belong. The Malinois was 4 years old, lean and tightly muscled, his coat a deep fawn shaded into mahogany along the spine, black mask sharp against intelligent amber eyes. He was not restless. He was alert in a way that spoke of pattern recognition, not fear. Jack had learned to trust that difference overseas. He trusted it now. By morning, Jack made a decision he should have made earlier. He stopped waiting. Caroline Sutter arrived 2 days later. She was in her early 40s, tall and straight-backed, with iron-gray hair cut just above the shoulders and a face marked by precise lines rather than softness. Her eyes were sharp, assessing, and she wore a navy blazer that looked less like fashion and more like armor. Caroline had built her reputation on dismantling cases everyone else assumed were unwinnable. She had once been married to a corporate attorney who taught her exactly how power hid its fingerprints, and the divorce had left her with a quiet contempt for people who used legality as camouflage. She listened without interrupting as Jack laid everything out: the inheritance, the custody order, the leak, the letter. When he finished, she folded her hands. "They move too fast," she said. "People who believe they own outcomes always do." Caroline began with paperwork. She requested Madeline Cross's financial disclosures from the past 5 years, cross-referencing them against public assistance records. What emerged was not dramatic at first glance, but Caroline understood how small lies stacked into leverage. Madeline had declared herself a single mother with limited income while quietly routing trust dividends into a private account under a holding LLC. The dates mattered. The signatures mattered more. Then came travel records. Madeline had arrived in Havenport 3 weeks before her supposed visit to Ava. She had checked into a coastal hotel under the name M. Cole, paying cash, requesting a room with a view of the cliff road leading to Seacliff House. That alone would have raised eyebrows. Combined with the timing of the first surveillance photos, it told a story of intent. The third thread came from Clarice Bell. Clarice was in her late 60s, thin, slightly stooped, with weathered brown skin and silver hair always tied back in a low bun. She had worked as a housekeeper for the Cross family for over 20 years, long enough to see how affection shifted when money entered the room. Caroline found her living quietly inland, wary but not surprised when asked to talk. Clarice's voice shook only once as she spoke. "That woman," she said of Madeline, "she never wanted the child. She wanted the leverage. She said it plain. The girl was the key to the house." The audio recording was clear. That night, as Caroline compiled evidence, Ranger stopped pacing and sat abruptly in front of the television. The screen flickered to life on its own, an autoplay clip from a local newsfeed. Ava's face filled the screen. She was seated in a neutral room, feet dangling, hands folded in her lap. When asked where she felt safe, she did not hesitate. "I want to live where someone waits for me to come home," she said softly. Ranger let out a low sound, not a bark, not a growl, recognition. Jack felt something steady itself inside his chest. The hearing was closed to the public. No cameras, no commentary. Just a long table, a welfare council, and a file thick enough to bend the spine. Madeline arrived composed, but Caroline noticed the tension at the corners of her mouth. Power behaves differently when it senses exposure. The evidence unfolded methodically. Financial misrepresentation, pre-arrival surveillance, false declarations. The audio from Clarice played last. No embellishment, no editorializing, just truth placed carefully in order. Madeline did not cry. She argued, she reframed, she blamed pressure, misunderstanding, poor advice. But the room had shifted. This was no longer a custody dispute. It was a question of motive. Dr. Helen Brooks spoke again, quieter this time. The child has shown consistent emotional clarity, she said. Her attachment is not confused. It is resolved. The decision came before sunset. Full legal custody to Jack Mercer. Immediate reunification. The inheritance recognized as separate property under the will of Edmund Mercer, uncontested. Jack did not react until Ava ran into his arms. Back at Seacliff House, the night felt different. Ava hung her drawing in the library. A simple crayon picture of 3 figures, a man, a dog, and a house, all holding the same yellow circle between them. Light spilled from every window as Jack turned lamps on one by one, pushing back the dark, not with force, but with presence. Ranger lay down near the hearth, finally at ease. Seacliff House stood against the cliff, lit and waiting, not wealthy because of what it held beneath the floor, but alive because someone had chosen to stay. Sometimes what we call a miracle does not arrive with thunder or light from the sky. Sometimes it arrives quietly, through endurance, through truth, through a heart that refuses to abandon what it loves. God does not always remove the storm. Often, He gives us the strength to stand in it without losing who we are. In everyday life, justice can feel slow, and faith can feel small. But even then, unseen hands are still at work, guiding outcomes toward what is right. If this story touched you, may it remind you that homes are built by presence, not possessions, and that love, when protected with courage, becomes a shelter no power can break. Please share this story with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment with what it meant to you, and subscribe to this channel to walk with us through more stories of faith, loyalty, and redemption. May God bless you, protect your loved ones, and watch over every step you take.